Who would challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:16 p.m. in, yes, as you would have guessed, the very cold, very dark, dismal, and above all, wet, rainy, sunless Budapest. So everything is as to be expected. So thank you very much, everybody who has joined me for the Thursday night live stream. Really appreciate your being here. And so I think was it I like the marbling in Hungarian pick salami. Well, I'm a big salami fan myself. I've always been a great great big fan of salami. And my favorite used to be, it's not so much anymore, but it used to be the Gyulai kolbász, the Hungarian kind of absolute rubbish in terms of nutritional value. It's just all fat and paprika, but very tasty. But I don't really. I used to eat it as a child. I don't really eat it very much now. But anyway, Peter Kovic says, "Good evening from the streets of Budapest." Well, if then you know something about the conditions in Budapest. So a couple of things I want to talk about today. So first of all, yesterday we had the big, widely anticipated meeting between President Trump and Netanyahu, and it was in many ways a very strange meeting because uh, Netanyahu was really just sort of hauled in, really almost like through the back entrance. There was no meet and greet with the press. Someone says fat is good. Yeah, fat is tasty. But there's nothing else but fat. Uh, but if it's fat and paprika, very very tasty. But you think this doesn't have too much nutritional value. But anyway, so there was no meet and greet with the press beforehand, and then there was no joint presser afterwards, and it was a little bit. It was a while before we actually even heard anything from Trump about the meeting. So we know really why Netanyahu flew into Washington. He was obviously very concerned about the U.S. Iran negotiations taking place in Oman, and particularly he was alarmed by the press reports that the United States was ready and willing to cut a deal with Iran, dealing exclusively with the nuclear issue, whatever that deal is. And they work out the enrichment via consortium, or whatever. But the Netanyahu really wanted the ballistic missiles issue discussed, because that's um, the problem that Israel faces. Israel would love to be able to do to Iran what it has done against its neighbors for decades, basically attack them at will. So they get hit by Israel, and they really have no means of retaliation. And what Iran showed um, last year, in June of last year, but also in 2024, that it actually can retaliate against Israel. And of course, this has caused great alarm in Israel, because Israel isn't used to missiles landing on the streets of Tel Aviv. And despite Israel's vaunted dome that whereby it could immune itself from attacks, it couldn't, and Iran was able to strike Israel. That's whether Iran managed to hit anything very strategic is a different issue, but Israel is not used to being attacked. So that's the deal that Netanyahu is seeking, which is to curtail Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. Now, of course, that is an existential matter, obviously, to Iran. No government in Tehran would simply sign away Iran's means of defending itself. But its ballistic missiles is its means of defending itself. It's already it's abjured the developing a nuclear capability. It said, no, we're not going to do it. It's against the teachings of the Quran and whatever. So therefore, essentially, Iran, given that it's facing two nuclear armed enemies, namely United States and Israel, facing them, nonetheless, Iran said, we will not develop nuclear weapons in turn. So, essentially laying ourselves naked before our enemies. But however, we will develop ballistic missiles. So we will actually be able to retaliate against our enemies with ballistic missiles, armed with conventional warheads. So at least we have some means of defending ourselves. So no Iranian government was ever going to give that up. So Israel's demand that Iran give up its ballistic missiles is, of course, ridiculous. Obvious to everyone, it's ridiculous, and was guaranteed to ensure Iranian rejection. Now, the next part of the plan is, of course, Iran rejects this demand, and then the United States decides, well, we have to hit Iran because it's refusing to accede to our demand. So that's why it was so important for Netanyahu to persuade Trump that forcing Iran to give up its ballistic missile capability is somehow a vital American interest. It obviously isn't, because Iran doesn't really have any means of hurting the United States. I mean, it might hurt U.S. forces in the region, but U.S. you know, but only I guess in the situation whereby the United States launches attacks against Iran and then Iran retaliates. But Iran has no interest in hitting the U.S. Mainland. So, but then the question is, well, did Trump accept that forcing Iran to give up its ballistic missiles is a major U.S. National interest? Well, that's very hard to say, because Trump says many things on many occasions, and it's not never obvious which of his statements really express his true position. I think he's a very cunning player, and he never really gives he talks all the time, but he never really gives away what his plans are. So he sometimes says, well, we're just, our goals are only that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, which Iran says, fine. That's, that's, if that's what you want, you've got a deal on your hands. And then, but then in that interview, and we talked about this yesterday, in that interview with Larry Kudlow, he did seem to say, well, the U.S. goals would be no nuclear weapons and no ballistic missiles. So now we don't really know what it is. Now, as I say, there was no joint press conference between Trump and Netanyahu following the meeting, and the only sense we got from how that meeting went was from the truth that Trump sent out. So let's take a look at what exactly Trump said after that meeting, and see if we can discern some clues as to what he intends. So here it is. I have just finished a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel and various of his representatives. It was a very good meeting. The tremendous relationship between our countries continues. There was nothing definitive reached other than I insisted that negotiations with Iran continue to see whether or not a deal can be consummated. So they already, at least in public, is saying, well, we're going to continue negotiating and then see whether we can get a deal done. Um, so it doesn't sound as if he's made any kind of a decision to attack Iran, which is obviously what Netanyahu was seeking. That now is the time to strike. And then, so that see whether or not a deal can be consummated. If it can, I let the prime minister know that will be a preference. So his preference is a deal. Okay, fine. If it cannot, we will just have to see what the outcome will be. Last time, Iran decided they were better off not making a deal, and they were hit with midnight hammer. Right? Of course, that isn't true, but nonetheless, that's the story Trump is going with. That did not work well for them. Hopefully, this time they will be more reasonable and responsible. Additionally, we discussed the tremendous progress being made in Gaza and the region in general. And as we'll see in a minute, Israel is by no means in agreement on that issue either. They don't think tremendous progress is being made in Gaza. There is truly peace in the Middle East. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So you get to say, okay, Iran, he wants to go on negotiating, and that his preference is a negotiated deal. But if we don't get a negotiated deal, we're going to hit them, really hard, harder than we hit them last July. All right, so that was Trump's truth, and then we got a quite terse statement from Netanyahu. Here it is. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just concluded the meeting at the White House with US President Trump and his team. In the meeting, they discussed the negotiations with Iran, Gaza, and regional developments. And it goes on. The Prime Minister emphasized the security needs of the State of Israel in the context of the negotiations. And the two leaders agreed on continued coordination and the close contact between them. All right, well, that's pretty, as I say, very terse. He emphasized the security needs of the State of Israel in the context of the negotiations, and the two leaders agreed on continued coordination and the close contact between them. So, yeah, I mean, it's about the minimum you can say. Need for continued coordination and close contact. And then here is the story from the Times of Israel, which says, returning to Israel, PM says Trump sees possible good deal with Iran, but he's skeptical. Okay, so he openly says, well, I'm kind of skeptical. Trump thinks there's a deal. I don't think there's a deal. I mean, of course, Trump, Netanyahu's never going to think that there's a deal. Before boarding Wing of Zion to fly back to Israel after meeting President Trump yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu says the US president believes the Iranians could be forced to accept a good deal. Yeah, that's more or less what Trump truthed out. I have just concluded a short but important visit to Washington, during which I spoke with our great friend President Trump, says Netanyahu on the tarmac in joint Andrews Air Base in Maryland. We have a close, genuine, and open relationship. The president believes the Iranians already understand who they are dealing with, he says. Trump thinks the conditions he's setting, combined with their understanding that they made a mistake last time by not reaching agreement, could lead them to accept terms that would make it possible to achieve a good deal. So here you can see how Netanyahu is describing Trump's frame of mind, but in a very snarky, sneering way. Trump thinks the conditions he's setting, combined with their understanding that they made a mistake last time by not reaching agreement, could lead them to accept terms that would make it possible to achieve a good deal. The Prime Minister says that he himself does not hide my general skepticism about the possibility of reaching any agreement with Iran. So that's it. So he's out, says outright, no agreement with Iran is possible. So Trump says, "Well, I'm negotiating with Iran. I want to see if we can get a deal done." And then he meets with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu said, "No, there's no way you could do a deal with Iran. It cannot happen." And then he says that he made it clear to the White House that any agreement must include the components that are important to us. So that's code for the ballistic missiles. Important to us, to Israel, and in my view, also to the entire international community. Not only the nuclear issue, but also the ballistic missiles and Iran's regional proxies. The excellent conversation also dealt with Gaza, says Netanyahu. This was another conversation with a great friend of Israel, a president like no other. Now, what's interesting here is that Trump is kind of getting himself into exactly the same situation on Iran that he's got himself into on Ukraine. So he's basically trying to square a circle. So he wants to do a deal on Iran. Obviously, that would be a desirable state of affairs, and particularly as the alternative, which is to use force, would have all sorts of unpredictable and quite possibly catastrophic consequences in the region. Now, Israel is perfectly happy with these catastrophic consequences, but Trump really isn't, because the consequences will be on him. It's not going to be on Netanyahu, it's going to be on him. So he doesn't really want to go there. However, he's tied his policy to that of Netanyahu, who wants the exact opposite. So Trump wants one thing, somehow to do a deal, get something done, put it on paper, and then he can hail this as a great agreement. That's what he wants. But then he says, "Well, now I'm going to discuss it with my good friend Bibi." But he wants exactly the opposite. He doesn't want any deal. He wants an attack on Iran like yesterday. And for Netanyahu, time is slipping by. I mean, he knows, even the more he says he's the greatest president we've ever had and so on, he knows perfectly well that whoever comes into the Oval Office after Trump will not be as favorably inclined towards Israel as Trump has been. Doesn't mean he's going to be anti-Israel, but it's not going to be as insanely on Israel's side as Trump has been. So he knows he has to move quickly. So here is Trump. He wants a deal, but then he ties the deal to pleasing Netanyahu, who doesn't want a deal. So it cannot happen. It's so mutually incompatible that it's almost laughable why we're doing this. And of course, that's why Netanyahu keeps coming to DC, and we're not getting anywhere. Now, what I said is very, very similar to Ukraine. Trump wants a deal with Russia. He wants to bring this war to an end. He has no interest in this war. He doesn't see any benefits to the United States by keeping this war going. And so he then has these conversations with Putin. Even had he had that summit with him in Anchorage, and then said, "Yeah, we can get a deal done. We're having these negotiations," and then Dmitriev and Witkoff and the meeting, blah blah. And then what does he do? "Oh, I got to keep Zelensky happy. Oh, I got to keep my NATO friends happy." Well, they want the exact opposite. They don't want any kind of a deal. The last thing they want is a deal. They had another one of these NATO defense ministers meeting, I think yesterday, and they come up with yet another package of weapon systems to send to Ukraine under the Pearl initiative. So they want to keep this war going. It's they make no secret of it. Yeah, we got to keep this war going. Go on fighting to the last Ukrainian. So again, there's a obvious incompatibility there. You can't you can't get a deal done with Russia if you're also trying to keep your NATO buddies happy. You can't get a deal with Russia if you're going to keep bringing Zelensky in to see you. So Trump is in exactly the same position on both of these um, crises, and he's not really making very much progress. But anyway, the Times of Israel kind of goes on in a quite interesting way, and here we have another story from today. IDF readying new Gaza offensive to disarm Hamas by force. Now, we saw earlier that truth sent out by Trump, basically saying what he's said before, that hey, we now have peace in the Middle East for the first time in 3,000 years or whatever, 5,000 years. Just think of a number and double it, and there we have. Um, but then Israel is saying, "Well, we're not really interested in this. This does, we're not all happy with this setup, and we're going to kind of bring it to an end." IDF readying new Gaza offensive to disarm Hamas by force. 4 months into a ceasefire with Hamas, the Israeli military is drawing up plans for a renewed offensive in the Gaza Strip to disarm the terror group by force. Okay, so that's it. So they're going in, Trump would come up with that 20-point plan with the international security force that would disarm Hamas. But basically, Israel said no, they were completely disarmed. But of course, Hamas never really agreed to a complete disarmament. I mean, again, there's a deal to be had there, but Hamas doesn't agree to a complete disarmament. And unsurprisingly, I mean, if you're completely disarmed, then you have no means to defend yourself when and if, or if and when Israel launches another offensive. It's exactly the same situation as Iran is in. So it says here the U.S. brokered ceasefire plan reached in October foresees the demilitarization of Gaza, including the disarmament of Hamas, along with a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Strip. However, implementation of the plan has remained unclear, with Israeli officials increasingly believing that stripping Hamas of its weapons will be impossible without the IDF taking action. Okay, so that sounds like they're planning to start the whole thing up all over again. And then, but it's even worse as the story goes on. It says, should hostilities renew, fighting is liable to be more intense and more widespread than previous rounds, as Israeli forces will no longer be constrained by the presence of hostages on Gazan soil. So they're going to mount another offensive in Gaza, but without any of the constraints. Apparently, they were very restrained, and they had one hand tied behind their backs and whatever during that rampage for 2 years. Israel also believes that, left unchecked, the terror group will remain in power in the Strip and try to rebuild its military strength while tightening its grip on areas under its control. Okay, so the military this month said that since the start of the ceasefire, Hamas has violated the agreement and focused its effort on restoring its military capabilities. Last month, a senior Israeli security official said that it was looking increasingly likely that the IDF would have to act militarily against Hamas to disarm it, as the military believed the terrorist organization will not do so of its own accord. And then the official said the goal of disarming Hamas would be attainable by force, but would likely take many years. Oh, so this war is going to go on for many years. Such an offensive aimed at disarming Hamas, should it go ahead, could be far more intense than the IDF's operations in the Strip throughout the 2 years of war that began on October the 7th. The military has stressed throughout the war that it planned its operations in Gaza with the hostages in mind, even though some were still harmed by Israeli actions. Yeah. And then until Hamas disarms, Israel is not expected to withdraw its troops from the Strip or approve any rebuilding efforts in the war torn territory, leaving the ceasefire agreement in limbo. Israeli troops currently hold 53% of the Strip, with most of the approximately 2 million Gazans in the remaining 47% of the enclave under ostensible Hamas control. All right. So that gives you a sense of where we are. So you got Netanyahu, who comes to the White House and tells Trump that he has no interest at all in any possible deal with Iran other than the one that involves Iranian surrender. Iran gives up its ballistic missiles, and of course, the moment Iran does that, Israel attacks. I mean, there's no question, because Israel's goal is the removal of the government in Tehran, and therefore, without the ballistic missiles, essentially, it'll be open hunting season for Israel in Iran. So that's Israel's goal. And then now, Trump's pride and joy. Trump's really one international accomplishment, which is this the Gaza ceasefire. Israel is making clear that it really doesn't have much interest in keeping it going. And so, and therefore, they're ready to not just to relaunch the war against Hamas, but that it would be a lot more fierce than anything they've done over the past 2 years. So I think, well, okay, well, that was the so how many? There was 72,000 at a minimum that were killed, but apparently this time around it's going to be a hell of a lot more. Okay, so that's one thing that I wanted to talk about. The other thing is, since I always introduce the show, there's Hungary, the bleakness of Hungary, and so on. But as you know, Hungary will soon have an election, April 12th, and the polls have Viktor Orban behind, eight or so points behind, according to Politico poll of polls. Now, I'm not entirely convinced by the polls, because I always think that the polling organizations overpoll Budapest, where they don't like Orban. I mean, but Orban is very popular in the countryside, in the villages, among farmers, and he's also very popular among the Hungarians who ended up living outside Hungary. As a result of Trianon, as you know, two-thirds of Hungary was taken away from the Hungarians, and basically became part of neighboring states. So you got Slovakia and Romania and Serbia, of course, Ukraine. But Orban gave them the vote, so they essentially they became Hungarian citizens, and they got the vote, even though they weren't living in Hungary. So the Hungarians who are living in Transylvania and Romania nonetheless get to vote in the Hungarian election. Now, those people are very pro Orban, understandably, and so I always think that the pollsters don't really take into consideration those particular Hungarians. It's much easier just to go find out what the people in Budapest want. That's yeah. So um, I am a little skeptical of the polls that have Orban far behind, but nonetheless, it's going to be at the very least I think a close race. Now the international media have got very excited. They've longed to see the back of Orban for a long time, and they think, well, maybe finally we're going to get our wish. But what they're doing now is quite interesting because they know that. And here you can see also the way the European Union and the European Commission and the whole EU bureaucracy is thinking, because they know that Hungary is rather a conservative country, and if you tout the the kind of liberal virtue of the leader of the Hungarian opposition, which is Magyar Peter Magyar, um, then you're going to possibly scare the Hungarians off and say, "Hey, well, we don't really want to do it." So, just as, and we talked about this. I think when we had 4 years ago, these live streams have been going on for 4 years. But 4 years ago, we were talking about an election, and the leader of the opposition was then Markizai. And the way Markizai was packaged as the opponent of Orban was that he was a real conservative. He was a really conservative guy. He's a family guy, and a boy from the country, and so no liberal he. And I remember saying that this is actually quite a cunning move, and just in the same way that the CIA packaged the opposition to Milosevic, not thrusting forward the man who really was the leader of the opposition, Zoran Djindjic, who was obviously kind of a Western agent, but instead they pushed forward as the front man, Vojislav Kostunica, and say, "Oh, this guy is a conservative, he's a nationalist, he really hates NATO, yeah, he's the guy who can beat Milosevic. In fact, he's going to show that it's Milosevic who's really the NATO tool." And whereas Kostunica was anti-NATO. Of course, it was a lie, complete lie, but it worked. And they tried that with Markizai, but color revolutions are a little hard in Hungary because, well, from Yugoslavia on, we're 25 years on, so I think governments have become much more adept at countering these Western-inspired color revolutions, and so Markizai's attempt to take over, being the conservative family man, the country boy, that didn't work. But they're doing something very similar now with Magyar, and presenting him as somehow a very conservative guy. Real. He's a true true conservative. But nonetheless, the Western media are just beside themselves with excitement. They can't believe that they may just be days away from ousting Orban. So here, for instance, is a recent piece in The Economist. Um, let me see here. This is, and you can see that this is the editorial in The Economist. Peter Magyar could defeat Viktor Orban, Hungary's leader, the authoritarian prime minister. He's an authoritarian, even though he's facing an election that he, according to the economists, he could lose. How can you be an authoritarian if you hold regular elections every 4 years and you could well lose? He says the authoritarian prime minister, a friend of Donald Trump, trails in the polls, but the rules favor him. So this is how you get try to get the best of all worlds. You lose if Orban wins, then you say, oh, that was a cheating. He cheated. It was a fraud. Anyway, here is Mr. Magyar is inspiring Hungarians, especially young ones, like no other politicians since Mr. Orban returned to power in 2010. And he had a previous stint in 1998 to 2002. The TISA leader owes some of his rise to charisma. He's fit and well dressed. Oh, fit and well dressed. That's nice. Usually in chinos and a slim fit white shirt, a striking contrast to the graying Mr. Orban. So they just the graying. I mean, notice how this is. But in any other context, you say, well, this is ageism and lookism. You could even, if they'd gone on a little bit more, you could also say, hey, this is fat shaming because Orban is overweight. I mean, no question. When you see him, he's rather overweight. And one thing, he's probably overweight. He's a kind of a workaholic. Um, Workaholic, which means he's kind of sedentary, and then when he's campaigning, what do you do when you campaign? Well, you have to stop in at Hungarian restaurants throughout the country, and it's not like they give you a slice of pizza; they give you a big bowl of stew with a big chunk of pork in the middle of it. So those are those are hearty meals that you eat a few of those every day, and you do become overweight. He is also indefatigable, having spent much of the past 2 years barnstorming across the country for rally after rally. Now, you should say, first of all, that Magyar worked for Orban in the past and was married to the justice minister who worked for Orban, which was the Judith Varga. And as we'll see, his marriage to Judith Varga ended very badly. And I think we talked about this, when it was a couple of years ago, that he recorded a conversation. Nice guy. He secretly records a conversation with his wife, in which apparently his wife said something like, we in the government covered something up. Hard to say that was exactly what she said, but he had that conversation, took that conversation, recorded, basically he records his wife secretly, takes what she says to him, to her husband at the time, and then takes it to the police saying, hey, look, I've got evidence of corruption. I secretly recorded my wife who admits the corruption. So that hasn't really got anywhere. So that was Judith Varga. But as we'll see in a minute, he kind of got himself involved with another woman who seems to hate him with as intense a passion as Judith Varga hates him. And Judith Varga accused him of using violence against him. It wasn't particularly, harsh violence, but she accused him of using some violence against her. Naturally, the liberals who have, of course, embraced the cause of Magyar, they don't seem to care very much about the complaints of his ex-wife, because she was an Orban minister. What the hell do we care? Even though she complains that he used violence against her. But anyway, the Economist doesn't care about it. Which normally, of course, if this was a politician that they didn't approve of, we'd be hearing all about. We'd have one article after another about this shocking accusations of male violence. Anyway, then we have since then, Mr. Magyar has stepped carefully. His own political beliefs are center right, of course, and he has avoided overtly liberal stances such as attacking Mr. Orban over his hostility to Ukraine. That's not true. That isn't true. He has attacked Orban over his hostility to Ukraine. He has attacked Orban over his ostensibly favorable view of Russia. What he hasn't done, and this is where he's being cunning, what he hasn't done is promise that he will change Orban's policy and that he will actually be much more amenable to assisting Ukraine. Now, I think he will. If he were to win an election, I don't have the slightest doubt, not the slightest doubt at all, that he will fall into line with Brussels for the obvious reason that that's his meal ticket. You know, he's one uh, way of winning this election is to say, well, with me in power, Hungary will improve its relations with the EU. And therefore, we're going to have all that EU money returning to Hungary because the Europeans have basically withheld 20 billion euros from Hungary, and essentially it's 20 billion euros that are not going to ever return to Hungary as long as Orban is prime minister. So Magyar's raison d'être is to say, well, look, if I'm prime minister, that money is coming back. So he has to play ball with Brussels. He has to show to Brussels, hey, I am changing the policy. I'm not continuing with the Orban policy of hostility towards Ukraine and friendship towards Russia. Just that's gone. That's going to change. So of course he's going to change that. But it says that instead he has focused on corruption. That's such a meaningless, nebulous notion, corruption, inflation, and deteriorating public services, especially hospitals. He has made a complete break with the parties that led the opposition to Fidesz over the past decade, whether liberal or socialist. So that, as I say, is correct. That there's really no kind of leftish opposition to Orban. So that party that actually used to be in power, that the inheritor of the Hungarian Communist Party, that leftish socialist party, that's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Tiszal's candidates for parliament, selected in November, are largely political neophytes with prominent roles in their communities. And then Eurasia Group, a consultancy, thinks Tisza needs to beat Fidesz by 4 to 5 percentage points to win a majority in parliament. At the moment, that looks like a good bet. Mr. Orban is trying to tar Mr. Magyar as a puppet of the EU. Well, he is. For his part, the Tisza leader appears to be avoiding any association with international liberals. So the economist picks up on that. Basically, I don't want any liberals coming in to campaign for me. Before visiting Hungary, this correspondent had scheduled interviews with several Tisza candidates. On arrival in Budapest, all were abruptly cancelled. All right, so that was the Economist, and then not relatively recently, he had given an interview. This is Peter Magyar had given an interview to the Financial Times. The Financial Times, obviously, also rooting for Magyar and hoping that Orban will be defeated, and so he gave this was the was it for the Financial Times, and here you can you can see how essentially vacuous Magyar is. This guy who just doesn't stand for anything, doesn't believe anything, doesn't think anything. Other than he's young, I guess he's good looking, if you like that sort of thing. And he looks like a cool guy, hey, I got a, wearing a leather jacket and, and he's thin, and which always works for a politician. Barack Obama, was a big selling point of his that he was tall and thin. If you're thin, you just got it over anyone else. So that Majo has that over Orban, and see how that the Economist, the graying Orban. But anyway, here's the Financial Times, and and here you can see uh, how essentially vacuous he is, and how little he uh, is willing to actually take a stand on anything. And here we have Orban nemesis vows to bring Hungary back into the fold. Those are the Hungary back into the fold. That's his selling point. This is it. So Peter Magyar is ready to recommit to NATO and the EU if he becomes prime minister after spring elections. And then Peter Magyar, whose upstart TISA party has a comfortable lead in opinion polls ahead of April's parliamentary vote, told the Financial Times that if he became premier, his government would honor Hungary's international commitments, including on joining the Eurozone. Well, that's an interesting one, and in fact, he does suggest that he would join the Eurozone. That is a absolute disaster for a country that's economically quite weak. Join the Eurozone. That is not a good move. We are in the EU and NATO, after all, our fundamental alliances that set our security and our daily lives. The current government does not act in concert with that. And then it says Viktor Orban is the closest EU ally of Vladimir Putin. So that's what the Economist said. Oh, he hasn't criticized Orban's foreign policies. Absolutely has. But as we'll see in a minute, what he hasn't done, and this is where he knows that Orban's policy of keeping Hungary out of that war, out of that Ukraine war, is actually quite popular in Hungary. I think Hungarians do not want to get involved in that war. So they actually, whatever else they might think about Orban, they appreciate the fact that he has kept Hungary out of the war. The other thing, of course, that they appreciate about Orban is that he's kept immigrants out. So that's another thing. There's going to be a problem for Magyar is Brussels is going to want him to change his immigration policy, which is that you're going to have to accept a quota of migrants. I mean, Orban has said that he's not going to accept any migrants at all. No quotas, nothing. Brussels isn't going to accept this from Magyar. So with Russian oil and gas flowing unimpeded, Orban averted a possible fuel crisis and price shock that could have derailed his re-election campaign, drawing scorn from Magyar, who said the premier has sold Hungary out. The Washington trip was not a Hungarian success, but Orban's personal escape path. Well, this was a trip, if you recall, to see Trump, and above all, to get Trump to lift or to exempt Hungary from the sanctions that the U.S. had imposed on Rosneft and Lukoil. And Orban went to see Trump, and Trump promised him, at least for a year, the sanctions are not going to hit Hungary. Now, Orban claimed that he's got this relief in perpetuity, but basically, Orban did get the sanctions relief. And then it says Magyar said that if he came to power, his starting point in Ukraine would be to recognize Moscow as the aggressor and to push for an immediate ceasefire in line with EU allies. Well, all of this is, of course, thoroughly disingenuous because we don't have to rehearse that, but that an immediate ceasefire without imposing any kind of conditions on Ukraine, such as no rearmament during the ceasefire, that it just isn't going to fly. Um, but in an olive branch extended to Ukraine skeptic and Moscow friendly voters, this is it. So, in an olive branch extended to Ukraine skeptic and Moscow friendly voters in Hungary, Magyar added that his government would not change tack on military support for Kiev or pursue an abrupt severing of ties with Russia. So this is the key, and the Financial Times recognizes it, that actually Orban's policy is rather. I mean, it's unpopular in Brussels, unpopular in Western Europe, unpopular with most European government, but among Hungarians, the policy of staying out of that Ukraine war is popular. So Magyar really, he has to keep in with Brussels, but he promises the voters that he's actually going to continue with Orban's policy, even though he said, "Oh, we're going to recognize Russia as the aggressor, but we're going to keep with Orban's policy." And then he says, while acknowledging that Hungary had to end its energy dependence on Russia over the next decade, he insisted that Russian imports should remain an option. This does not mean that by ending dependence on someone, you no longer continue to buy from them. So this is a completely meaningless, utterly vacuous statement. So, oh yeah, we got to end our dependence on Russia. Oh, but doesn't mean that we're going to stop buying oil and gas from Russia. Well, the EU has told, this is they have the new policy out. The new policy is you have to stop. That's it. They've made this limit 2027. You got to stop by 2027. No more. Zero of oil and gas imports from Russia. So he's kind of having it. Well, we don't want to stop. It's a long term. We're going to dependent, because he knows the moment he actually spells anything out, the moment he has to make any kind of a choice, no one's going to vote for him, or at least the usual. The kind of the sort of the Budapest kind of liberals will vote for him, but that's just not enough to get him to over the finish line. Um, and so there, so it continues. Magyar said he would always put his country's national interests and security of supply first, followed by pricing considerations, sustainability, and geopolitics. He defended this stance when asked how it differed from Orban's, and said that he was not willing to sacrifice Hungary's energy security for international sanctions or to accept higher energy prices in the name of some lofty principle. It's just meaningless, absolutely, just completely meaningless what he's saying here. Magyar rejected accusations made by the Orban campaign and Russian propaganda channels that he was a puppet of Ukrainian President Zelensky, but his stance on Ukraine differs very little from Orban's. But former Fidesz members vowed to keep several policies of the current government. The former Fidesz members, as I said, he belonged to Fidesz, vowed to keep several policies of the current government in regard to Ukraine, advocating for the rights of ethnic Ukrainians living in Western Ukraine, not sending any military aid to Kiev, and putting Ukraine's future EU membership to a referendum in Hungary. Now, he, of those three promises, he's not, the idea that he's not going to send military aid to Kiev, rubbish. Of course he will. Absolutely, the EU and NATO will insist on that. So that's going to happen. On the question that he's going to hold up Ukraine's fast tracking of membership of the EU, untrue. The Brussels will insist that Hungary drop its opposition to Ukraine's EU membership. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure he will advocate for the rights of ethnic Hungarians. I mean, anyone can do that. I mean, there's just no effort is required. Ukraine will ignore it, but they'll just they'll continue. And then Budapest would also revive plans to join the Eurozone. He added, new EU members have all pledged to adopt the common currency when their economies are meeting certain criteria, but Orban has diverged from that track. Orban's governments have not used but abused the fiscal independence, and the unorthodox economic and financial benefits have not benefited but harmed Hungary. Now, the unorthodoxy is actually that Hungary has kind of insisted on a kind of Hungarianization of the economy. Just basically, they don't want the entire economy to be taken over by by particularly by Germany. So they want to ensure that banks and businesses have majority Hungarian ownership. Um, but anyway, now this is where we get into an interesting uh, area, which is the latest the scandal that's hit Magyar. And let me just get all right. So that's that. I want to pull up this. No. Okay, so the latest, which is he announced, this is Magyar announced yesterday that Fidesz is going to dump some sex video of him out in the public, and he made this announcement, and he showed here's a photograph, and he made a photograph of a bedroom, and he said, the Fidesz, they're trying to smear me and destroy me, and they're going to basically release a a, 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 a sex tape. And so here is, and then today he elaborated and said, well, this is a sex tape involving me and my ex girlfriend. And this is Telex, which says Peter Magyar on the video made about him. We had consensual sexual relations with Evelyn Vogel, and I've never used drugs. Because what happened was that this picture that was released yesterday, it says, well, this is which Magyar said, well, this is the room in which we had sexual relations, but everybody could see in that room there was a tray that had what looked like white powder. So it sounded like, okay, well, this is where you had drug fueled sex with this woman. Now, Hungary is quite strict about, well, not the sex, but they are quite strict about drugs, and that could be a kind of a problem for him. So here is this telex. The translation is a little awkward. It's a kind of a Google Translate. So Magyar talked. So this is the video that Magyar released today. Magyar talked in the video about how Tisza organized a summer party for its supporters on August the 2nd, 2024. And he also participated in it. Evelyn Vogel was also at the event and later appeared in public with audio recordings of her. So that's his former girlfriend. This is the girlfriend that he had after his marriage with Judith Varga came to a bad end. At that time, as Magyar said, they were no longer in a relationship, but the woman invited him to a house party where he went, letting himself be seduced. So they're not in a relationship anymore, but he goes to this party and allows himself to be seduced by Evelyn Vogel. The politician said that he and Vogel then went to the apartment shown in the picture, where Mark Rodnoy had never been at that time or at any other time. Mark Rodnoy is I think he's a vice president of Tisza. There were other people in the apartment, and Magyar saw alcohol and a substance that looked like a drug on the table in front of them. But he did not consume any of these. He and Vogel then went to bed in the room known to the whole country. That's the picture of that bedroom. They were there from 5 a.m. to noon in the apartment and then had lunch together. Magyar said that later it became clear from Vogel's behavior and blackmail that he had walked into a Russian type compromat. So Russia, here is so here we are. We're in the middle of an election, and of course we have Russia involved, a Russia type compromat. But that his conscience was clear because he had not committed any illegal acts. And then I don't know how the images and audio recordings illegally recorded in the apartment with Secret Service equipment will be manipulated afterwards, said Magyar, but he suggested that the video of him be released uncut. Magyar emphasized on that video of him, that's the whole, I guess, having sex with his former girlfriend. Magyar emphasized that he has never used drugs and will submit to a drug test at any time. He also said that he believes that they are trying to attack him, not because of him, but because of the power of Tissa. And then he also said they will not be able to intimidate or blackmailing him with Russian Secret Service methods, Russia. And that there'll be little Russian Secret Service help and a lot of fake videos. There will be a destruction of my family. Magyar said that those who participated in this from Fidesz, the Secret Service, or other agencies will soon enjoy the hospitality of the Hungarian penitentiary system. And he would stay as long as the nation benefits from it. I will do it as long as I can. So he's throwing around these accusations, but as you can see, I don't know what role Fidesz played in all of this, but obviously the one who does seem to be playing a role in this is his former girlfriend. So this is the picture. It's a little hard to see in this picture, but you can just see to the left. So you have the bed, and then next to the bed on the left is this little tray, and there's white powder on the tray. So that's the photograph that was released yesterday. And then here is from Index. Peter Magyar admitted to having sex in the infamous room where the participants took drugs. Magyar admitted that he had sexual relations with Evelyn Vogel. And then so on. And then he has Magyar made the announcement on his social media page at 4 p.m. on Thursday afternoon about the latest government and Secret Service smear campaign. The party chairman said that on August 2nd, 2024, Tissa organized a summer party for its supporters, which he also attended. At the end of the event, his ex-girlfriend, Evelyn Vogel, appeared and invited him to a house party at the apartment of someone who was also present at the nightclub. And then it says, according to the party chairman, they were no longer in a cohabiting relationship. So sorry about the awkward translation. Cohabiting relationship doesn't sound good in English. I think basically they were no longer living together, I guess. With Vogel Evelyn at the time, he said that they arrived at the apartment shown in the pictures around 5 a.m., where some people did not know where some people he did not know were staying. Mark Rodnoy did not visit the property that night or at any other time. The reason why they're bringing up Mark Rodnoy is that the photograph appeared on a website, something like Mark Rodnoy who. But we don't know whether that website had anything to do with Mark Rodnoy. I mean, it was maybe somebody just took that domain name, but that was where the photograph appeared. He pointed out that there were alcohol and drug-like substances in the apartment, but he did not touch them. After a few minutes in the bedroom shown in the picture, they went into the room known to the whole country and had consensual sexual intercourse with Evelyn Vogel. It's so nice, he's saying so much about his personal life. I mean, everyone's really fascinated with this. He added that they left the property around noon on August the 3rd when no one else was there. According to Maja, they had lunch together afterwards. Afterwards, it became clear to me from Evelyn Vogel's actions and her increasing blackmail that I had walked into a classic Russian type scandal. But since I had not done anything illegal, my conscience is clear. And then, he says in the video, of course, I do not know how the images and audio recordings illegally recorded in the apartment with Secret Service equipment will be manipulated afterwards, but I suggest that the entire recording made in the room be released uncut if possible. Anyway, so then he goes on. Madjar also said that he did not expect the two adults. So anyway, that's all. Then he sent a message to Viktor Orban. There are 59 days left for this vile, corrupt government. As you sow, so you reap. You will not be able to intimidate or blackmail me. There will be little help from the Russian Secret Service. Now, he's throwing around the attacks on Orban against the Russians, but his real problem here, it seems to me, is the this former girlfriend of his, because she kind of acquired this real hatred for him. Here's another story from Index. Evelyn Vogel, Peter Magyar is not who he seems. The former partner of the TISA party president contacted our newspaper to talk about their relationship, the initial period of the party formation. And Evelyn honestly confessed to our colleagues about what her relationship with Peter Magyar was like, what she thinks now about the leader of the opposition, and then said, he's not a brave man. He is the man who put everything on the table. He had no vision, no conviction. He did not want to change he does not want change in the country. He always had a big mouth, but in reality, he played it safe. I think, is there a picture of her? And then, Peter Magyar kept his promise to repeat the Sunday afternoon report. He sued Evelyn Vogel. This was already a while ago. This isn't recent. Peter Magyar filed a complaint against Evelyn Vogel at the Budapest police headquarters. And it says, I hesitated in the last moment about filing a complaint because I'd previously been in a civil partnership with Evelyn Vogel. I had asked her for her hand in marriage, and I imagined my life with her. However, the fact that she repeatedly blackmailed me and my party colleagues, and then after not receiving 30 million forints, which is that's a nice chunk of change. It's about, I guess, 75,000 euros. Yeah. She demanded secured financial advantage and so on. All right. So he has this problem here with the issue here is that, well, first of all, Hungary is, as I said, a conservative country, and they don't really like this kind of sexual shenanigans. I mean, this doesn't go down terribly well. I mean, to a lot of people, they don't really care that much. But for many in Hungary, they don't really like it, and particularly when when there was already he had an issue with his wife, this is Judith Varga, and here it's worth just going back to to what happened with Judith Varga, and let me just find this. So here's a story from the Budapest Times, and this is all 2024. Former Justice Minister accuses ex-husband of blackmail, terrorizing. So Peter Magyar has blackmailed and terrorized me, Judith Varga, the former Justice Minister, said on Facebook, referring to her ex-husband, who today published a recording of a conversation between them, which he made secretly in their family home. Shocking. Peter Magyar has now done it. He has been blackmailing me with that for a year, Varga said, noting that Magyar had secretly recorded the conversation between them when she was justice minister. Magyar alleges that the contents of the recording provide evidence of government wrongdoing. And now he has used it for political wrongdoing. A person like that is not worthy of any kind of trust. Varga also said that she had given him a number of chances to start over during the terrible years of domestic violence. And then, referring to an interview to camera that Magyar gave, which was streamed online on Monday, Varga said, I was just watching that cruel face and I was chilled to the bone. He lies and manipulates, and it brings back everything I had to endure over the past 16 years. She added that she could recall plenty of examples of verbal and physical violence. Varga recalled one evening when she had gone to bed, her husband came home in a drunken state and threw books and clothing at her. I felt the buckle of his belt hitting my back. I tried to crouch smaller and waited for the next blow. I was afraid that it would hit my spine, but I didn't dare move. At the time, I decided that I would divorce him, she said, adding that when she told him, he begged me and made me promise, as he had done so many times for 16 years. He used all the old tricks and methods through which he had always managed to put me back on the roller coaster of domestic violence. But this time I was determined to find a way out. Um, and then she said Magyar had started threatening her when she insisted on a divorce. This was the context for this footage. He was preparing to blackmail me. He was provoking me by reading out gossip from the press. Since he had been terrorizing me for days, I told him what he wanted to hear so that I could get away as soon as possible in a state of intimidation. People say things they do not mean, the former minister said. So that's her explanation for that tape recording. As remember what I was saying, that he recorded his wife, in which the wife allegedly admitted that, we hushed something up, we hushed some corruption up. So he records his wife and then takes this tape and hands it in to the police. So, very nice. He has a tape, taping his wife, shops his wife to the police. So, I don't think anyone's going to have too much sympathy for Magyar. Now he's claiming, I was recorded. There's an audio and video recording of me having sexual relations. He claims that he didn't partake of drugs or alcohol. I don't know. Who knows? But it's all kind of fairly sordid. And why I think it's damaging to Magyar is that really not that much is known about him. I mean, and if you haven't taken a particularly decisive, strong position on issues, so well, this is who I am. This is my stance on this. This is where I'm going to change policy. Instead of this kind of nebulous, oh, I'm against corruption. We have to deal with corruption, corruption. Oh, and the affordability. This very generic criticisms, which is anyone can mouth those off. If you haven't really taken any courageous stances, as this woman, this Evelyn Vogel, who seems to hate Magyar as intensively as not intensively as intensely as Judith Varga did, then that's going to work against him because there is ultimately a character issue. This is someone without any strong beliefs who had once worked for Orban, was married to a minister of Orban's, and now he's the great white hope, embraced by liberals and embraced by the Economist. So that's nice, sordid tidings from from Hungary. Anyway, let's now move on to our locals board, where the Gagglers meet and converse, and do what they can to maintain the lifestyle of to which the dogs have become accustomed, or to which the dogs have resigned themselves to. And so here we start off with Danaki, who says, "Kedvesh George, dear George, as the meme goes, ain't you tired of all this multipolar winning, son? Euro crude at all-time high of discounts, yeah, minus 42%. 3 days after standing with Cuba, Russian airlines are evacuating. Now the only question remains: when is China going to replace the U.S. global financial system so we can finally pay with renminbi for locals and Substack?" Yeah, that's very true. As we were talking about this the other day, the whole thing with some of the Lavrov, who would always be pontificating away about, oh, it's a multipolar world and so on, and, where essentially the basis of that argument of the multipolar world is by measuring the size of the economies of some of the Asian countries, India, China, Indonesia. And then you can say, well, some of the other Asian economies, Vietnam, Malaysia, and, we're also growing. And so then you say, okay, well, that means this is where the economic center of the universe is heading. Well, of course it isn't. And as I pointed out before, if you have a big country and you add up, all of the economic activity, then you're going to get a very large number. And so, yeah, you got these Asian countries, and they're very large. And so when you add up, the sum total of the economic activity in those countries, then you're going to get a very big number. But that doesn't mean that the geopolitical center has somehow moved to Asia. It's just simply a misunderstanding of numbers. Uh, and hence there's this argument that, oh, now China, because if you add it all up, China has a bigger economy than the United States. Yeah, but China is not able to project the kind of economic and financial power that the United States is able to, or India. I mean, it's absurd. But the other aspect of it is that there's some sort of a correlation between the size of your economy and your geopolitical weight in the world is also absurd. Um, when we look at one geopolitical issue after another, whether it's the Middle East, Iran, Cuba, whatever, it's always the United States that is the dominant player. It's the United States that sets the agenda, whether by threatening force or coming up with some peace plans or whatever. But at no point are we dealing with a Russian peace plan. We're not dealing with a Chinese peace plan. We're not dealing with an Indian peace plan. I mean, where's the Indian peace plan for Iran? Where's the Chinese peace plan for Iran? So, if one just tries to apply a certain amount of common sense, then you can see that the world is a long way from being multipolar. Yeah, China's getting rich. It's not really getting rich, but yeah, China's economy keeps growing, and its trade surplus keeps growing. But that doesn't. You can't translate that into geopolitical influence. And as we've seen this week, where J.D. Vance he visited Armenia and Azerbaijan and started, signing all kinds of deals. Well, it's fairly obvious what the significance of this is. This used to be Russia's backyard. This is Russia's near abroad. This is within Russia's sphere of influence. And here's the United States um, just moving in there and starting signing all kinds of deals. And that's after that peace signing ceremony between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And of course, that also involves Turkey because Azerbaijan and Turkey always go together. That shows that 30 years ago, any deals between Armenia and Azerbaijan would be brokered by Russia. Russia would be the decisive player, but now it's the United States. So so I think the multipolarity, and as I said, when that um, interview by Lavrov, which we talked about on Tuesday, he seems to be acknowledging this, that maybe we're a little premature in celebrating the arrival of multipolarity. Anyway, thank you so much, Danaki. And then we have Dennis Misty. Hello from Yorkshire. Good, it's always good to um, talk to people in Yorkshire. So, greetings to you. And Carlos says, "What do you think about Black History Month?" Well, I've always been a very wary of this kind of um, this kind of ethnic identity, and and particularly the celebration of, or not even ethnic, but anyway, some particular group identity, and so you get a whole month to yourself, in which we're supposed to extol your history. I think Black history is, I think, absolutely a legitimate issue to a subject to study. I think there's no question about that. Um, and all about the history of the slave trade and everything else. So, there's a lot there to study, and that's a good thing. But when you devote a whole month to it, then I just sort of puzzled, because that suggests that we only study that and we don't study anything else. We have to focus all of our attention to that and to nothing else, and that this has to take precedence over everything else. And then I can't really go along with anything like that. And the same, of course, happens with Gay Pride Month. So we're going to devote. I think it's June every year. We've got to devote this to entirely to gay history, gay culture, gay civilization. The whole lot. Um, you know, True, and then we forget about everything else. So you get essentially this um, mainstreaming of different groups and their identities and their agendas. And so therefore, I think that's a absolutely wrong way to go. Anyway, thank you for that. And then Dennis Misty, a friend from Yorkshire, says a creature Ratcliffe is commenting on immigration in Britain, but lives tax free in Monaco. So it goes. Poor old Britain. The football of Musk, Trump, and the whole lot of them. Yeah, I read that. He's the I guess not the sole owner of Manchester United Football Club. He's the I guess he's a partner along with the forgot the name of that, the group that owns Manchester United. He made a statement about immigrants, and essentially they're colonizing the country. They were invading, colonizing the country, and there was a lot of the usual kind of fake outrage on everyone's part, denouncing him, and Radcliffe was, of course, a little vulnerable, because he's a billionaire who actually, the owner of Manchester United. He lives in Monaco, so he doesn't actually pay taxes to the United Kingdom government. So he became everyone's favorite person to denounce. I have to say I couldn't quite get worked up denouncing him. I mean, obviously he didn't exactly express himself um, optimally, um, but you know, the people who have allowed mass migration into the UK for many many years, despite all the warnings and despite all the promises that this would come to an end. Um, they don't have a right to denounce anyone. They don't have a right to denounce Ratcliffe or anyone else, because they brought this crisis on in the UK. And essentially the large parts of the country now have indeed been taken over by people from entire continent, and from a different continent with a different culture, different religion, and they've just taken over large parts of the country. That was encouraged by political leaders, including Keir Starmer and all the rest. So it's a wonderful way of distracting the public and drawing attention away from their own. I wouldn't say negligence, because it was a deliberate policy, from their own malfeasance in allowing something so disastrous to happen. So by whipping up hatred against Ratcliffe. Oh, he's a billionaire and he lives in Monaco. It's a nice way of changing the subject, but the subject should be them. They've done worse for Britain than Ratcliffe has through his pronouncements. Anyway, thank you, Dennis. And then MKMRD says disarm of Hamas is a great idea if there was a basis for that, but as usual, there is none. No, that's right. And I think that what they're going to do is, and they're making it clear that this issue of disarmament of Hamas, which Hamas never really committed itself to doing, will be used as the basis to restart the campaign against Gaza. And they will use Trump's words against him, because Trump himself has said, well, Hamas needs to disarm. And so therefore, Israel will say, oh, look, Hamas has not disarmed. So therefore, we have to do it ourselves. So that's really the problem, because Trump has never said no to Israel. Then essentially he's opened the door for Israel to take matters into its own hands, launch a campaign against Gaza that probably will be even nastier and more ferocious than the one that ended last October. So anyway, thank you for that. And then Cynthia, it's always very good to see you, Cynthia. It was Cynthia who, as I say, a film critic, film expert, film scholar, film encyclopedist, who always provides us with so many fascinating disquisitions on film history, on the making of films, on what's involved in film production, film acting, and all the myriad activities that comprise the making of a film. And so Cynthia always gives us an insight into every single one of those uh, activities. And so we're always very privileged to learn so much from her, and particularly when we have our Monday night screening night, at least for me, Monday night screenings where we show very good films, accompanied by Cynthia's very learned commentary. So that we're really very fortunate with that, and that's a very good reason why people should join the Gaggle, the gaggle.locals.com. Very inexpensive. So you can join, and then you'll enjoy, among all the many other contributions here, from Danaki, from Marty, um, Steve K9, and Anne Marie, and of course from Cynthia, who not only provides us with learned commentary on films, but always asks during the live streams the most interesting and the most penetrating questions. So thank you, Cynthia, for everything. And anyway, Cynthia says, first, Mark Levin comes out and says Trump is, quote, the first Jewish president of the US. God. Then Bibi awards Trump with the Israel Prize. Oh, God. The first person outside Israel and first foreign leader chosen to receive it. And finally, Nat Rothschild, a financier and heir in the Rothschild banking dynasty, publicly praises Trump for U.S. military action in Venezuela, tweeting congratulations after the intervention. Doesn't that tell you all you need to know about how Trump shapes his foreign policy? Those are all very powerful points. I guess the the jury in a sense is still out on where all this is likely to lead now, because we have at the moment a ceasefire of sorts. I know, yes, it's not really a ceasefire. Israel continues to pulverize Gaza. Israel continues to colonize the West Bank. Um, but Trump has at least put something in place that was an improvement on what there was before. I think, as I said, let's say 600 people have been killed by Israel since October 2025, which is 4 months. Um, that's 600 in 4 months, which is obviously a much better average than 72,000 over 24 months. So you can do the math. It's a major a major, at least, relaxation of the horror. I mean, it's not perfect by any means, but at least it's better than what there was. Now, the question arises: is how vested is Trump in this peace plan that he had put forward? I mean, he came up with this whole the 20-point plan, and that includes the Board of Peace, the International Security Force, the Palestinian government of technocrats, and the rest. Is he committed to this? Maybe he's not. I mean, we looked earlier at what the stories from Israel. It sounds like Israel is about to destroy the whole structure. Does Trump just sit on his hands and do nothing and allow Israel to do this? Well, maybe. Um, but it's not clear to me yet which way it's going to go. That meeting yesterday with Netanyahu was by no means any kind of an endorsement of Israeli actions. There may be something we don't know. They may have agreed on something and they're lying about it. They're not telling us. But at least in terms of the public statements, Trump distanced himself from Netanyahu. Netanyahu, in his comments afterwards, didn't seem particularly happy with what he came away with from Trump. So, it's still possible that Trump will sign a deal with Iran and avoid an Israeli attack. That's certainly possible. I mean, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but if he doesn't do that, if he does launch an attack on Iran, if he allows Israel essentially to restart the Gaza war, then that's his entire legacy is in the toilet. I mean, it's gone. I mean, then he's got nothing. So ultimately, it's always going to rest on which way is Trump going to go. And I think at this stage, it's still an open question. And he could absolutely just do everything that the Israel lobby wants from him. Well, if he does that, then he'll be a more disastrous president than George W. Bush. He'll be say, yeah, you brought even more chaos and misery to the Middle East, than George W. Bush did. So it's it's going to be up to him. It's his legacy that's going to be on the line. Um, anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then NKMRD says, I watched some EU talk today. God, sorry about that. The usual people speaking, and hell, things have become boring without Borrell. I don't know. Kaya Skalas, she always provides some entertainment. And there was just sidekicks regarding Russia, but it wasn't a theme anymore. I doubt a change in mindset among certain EU officials is the reason for that pressure. Well, from somewhere. Um, yeah, it's the there's nothing new that's happening. I think that's the truth is that uh, Trump's mind is now on other things. He seems to have given up for the time being on Greenland. He doesn't seem to have much to say about Ukraine either. He is focused at the moment on Iran, focused on domestic issues. So the Europeans don't really have anything very much to talk about. So other than the usual empty blather about, oh, we've got to become responsible for our own security and all the rest. So I think the problem is there's nothing new going on. There yet another package of arms for Ukraine. Nothing interest there. And then as I say, Kaya Kala, oh yeah, we have to you know set up our own institutions. We got to become a geopolitical force in the world. A lot of nonsense. So I think it's Europe doesn't have anything to say, has no identity of its own. It's entirely a kind of essentially a sidekick of the United States. And when the United States isn't saying anything, United States isn't doing anything, then Europe just fades away into complete irrelevance. There's nothing whatever of any interest coming from Brussels, other than usual whining and about Orban or whatever. So I think that's it's not so much Borrell, but it's just nothing much is coming from the United States. I think that's going to change. I think Trump is going to probably return to the subject of Ukraine. I think Trump may well return to the subject of Greenland, but until then, we're kind of um, so essentially, nowhere land. Anyway, Summer Petro says, George, we are told that Hungary is at the bottom of EU economic league table in terms of GDP per person, the capital per person. Per capita GDP. However, many Eastern EU countries have lost huge percentage of their active population. That's a very good point. Latvia, Estonia, Romania, Bulgaria in the range of 20 to 30%. Yeah, absolutely. Many of them just gone absolutely migrated to the west. Hungary has also, but substantially less, maybe 10%. Such population outflows would tend to flatter GDP per person. That's a very good point. Yeah, that's absolutely excellent point. Exactly. The populations have declined, and then per capita GDP goes up. Yeah, the absolute right. Hence, Hungary is not underperforming, as this measure might suggest. If a denominator of a ratio falls, the ratio increases. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I think the other aspect of it is Hungary has pursued a distinctively nationalist economic policy, and I think that's absolutely right. They wanted to make sure that they didn't become dependent on the EU. In other words, they wanted to maintain a kind of a Hungarianization of the economy. They made sure of Hungarian ownership, that they wouldn't allow a complete German ownership of the economy, and the EU was very pissed off with that. So they put in all sorts of controls that the EU has gone on flailing against. They're violating our rules. The constant Hungary is violating them, but essentially they're violating the EU rules in order to maintain Hungarian control of the economy. And I think and Hungary has also diversified its sources of investment. and it's still getting fairly cheap, relatively cheap energy from Russia. So all of that kind of gives Hungary a much, I think, a strong economic base. And but you're absolutely right on that issue of the per capita GDP, which is almost entirely a kind of a fairly meaningless gesture, a meaningless measure, precisely because, yeah, I mean, if people leave, then and your population, generally, as and that's true about Hungary, but basically you have almost no population growth. On the contrary, it's a population decline. Deaths outnumber births every year. Yeah, you can have impressive per capita GDP numbers. So thank you for that. Thank you, Samuel Petros. See you soon in Hungary. Thank you for your generosity. And I think I have to bring this thing to an end, unfortunately, because I have to do a broadcast. And so, but it was thank you everybody who joined me. Thank you for all of your questions, comments, suggestions. Everything was nice. Please um, join our group, our community, the gaggle.locals.com. We can see we have the highly sophisticated, highly intelligent members, and you can enjoy all of our contributions. The film, the music, and everything. So we get it all. So you can join and not even pay. If you don't want to pay, I understand you don't want to pay, but you can be a member without paying the subscription. So, but please join, and then you can enjoy the movies, the discussions, the debates, everything. Anyway, we will be back. We're going to do some more podcasts over the weekend with Peter, then live stream with Peter on Monday, and then next Tuesday I'll be back with my solo. I hope to see you all then. Thank you so much. See you soon. All the best. Good night. Bye bye.